this is what separates professionals from everybody else is they actually have coaches, mentors, people that are providing them feedback who are as good as they are in terms of their skill sets, but they're older and they have wisdom and they're sharing their wisdom with them as a coach or mentor.
Are you ready to transform your life? This is a no-nonsense show helping immigrants like you create generational wealth, even while working full-time. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Saket Jain.
Welcome back, my Great to Wealth listeners. Today, I have the pleasure to talk to Tom Corley. I've got to know him very, very briefly, but his story is great. He's got all the right pedigrees, Big Fours, CPA, CFP, the right designation. But more importantly, he's an avid researcher and trying to basically figure out different ways that he can help. And his story is going to get unfolded. I'm not going to give too much of it away. I really want to encourage you guys to stay till the end, because one thing we're going to be talking about is four paths to wealth. And one of the way is going to be very, very closely resemble your path. So stay till the end. Hopefully you're going to get the value that I believe our discussion is going to bring today. Tom, with that said, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me on, Saket. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Tom, I know you are recovering from something that you caught over the last few weeks. And then I had a severe headache last week. So if we go down the trail of Tom coughing and me having headaches, just bear with us. We're gonna do our best to add the value that we promise our audience. So Tom, tell me answer one question, buddy. What does the term migrate to wealth mean to you?
Well, I think it means something differently to everybody. For me, migrate to wealth is really about realizing my final dream. You know, that was, I think everybody should have a list of their dreams that they want to realize in life. And my final one is to become someone I call J.C. Jobs, who was one of the main characters in my books, my Rich Habits books. So he's the sort of the future ideal version of Tom Corley. And every day, when I wake up, I do what I think J.C. Jobs would do. I kind of follow him as a template and he's very wealthy. In my books, he's sold 500 million books. He's worth over $250 million. And he was an accountant, just like me. So he started out that way, and his wife passed away. And it's a very cool story. And I think that it gives me we all need a GPS, a destination. And then if we have that destination, then the obstacles and the mistakes and the failures, they don't stop us. They just are things to be overcome. And that's kind of how no matter what has gone on in my life, I've stayed focused on trying to become J.C. Jobs. So I think that's the key. It's my guiding light.
I love that, Tom. One thing I really like when you're telling about is that the fictional character, even though it's fictional, J.C. Jobs, it's really your aspiration. Your true aspiration of if you had to be born a certain way and write your own destiny and all that good stuff, this is the person, as of today, you think you want to become. Was that the inspiration for the book?
Yeah, it's really the inspiration for Rich Habits, for writing the book, was the idea. I got a lot of feedback from people I was teaching these Rich Habits to in training sessions. I call them learning sessions. They were begging me to write a book about this stuff because they were having some success, and they thought that this was groundbreaking stuff that I was doing. And this is going back to 2009, 10, 11. So yeah, I ended up writing Rich Habits. I had never written a book before. I didn't know even how to begin. But whenever I don't understand something, my starting point is always buy 3 books on the topic, read them, and then the other thing I have in the back of my mind is no matter how hard it might be, there is never going to be anything that I tackle that is going to be harder than studying for and passing the CPA exam.
Oh my God, man. Yeah, I've definitely heard that.
That was, a year and a half, 22-hour exam, year and a half of study.
Wait, it's a 22-hour exam? I didn't realize that.
It isn't that. And, when I took it, it was a 22.5-hour exam. It was so hard and so much content that was covered in it. And, you have to really, when you achieve something that is that like monumental. And everyone who assists for the CPA exam has the same reaction. My God, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I remember when someone said, one of the people in my learning sessions, one of the students, they said, you got to write a book. And I was like, I don't know how to write. I'm not a writer. I'm an accountant. And they said, can't be harder than getting your CPA. And I said, damn, he's right. And sure enough, Saket, it wasn't. It was a lot easier. It was monumentally easier. It was so much easier. So, and then I found out, and this is important. This is why you pursue dreams and the goals behind the dreams, is you might unearth an innate talent that you possess. And I discovered 2 innate talents. One I already kind of knew I was a very good speaker. I liked doing it, and I was good at it. I didn't know I was a good writer. I felt like I was good at math, but I wasn't really, writing wasn't a thing. Well, I found out I have this innate talent, and writing came just so much easier for me than it does for a lot of other people. And the other thing that happens whenever you discover an innate talent that you possess is it brings you enormous joy and bliss, because you're on the right path. You're on the path you're supposed to be on when you discover an innate talent and you devote the rest of your life to exploiting it and perfecting it. So I found this innate talent, and it gave me an enormous amount of joy, happiness, and bliss by engaging in it. And that's, I'm so glad I found it. I was in my 40s. Imagine going your whole life, and most people do, without finding their innate talent. It's just a shame. Yeah. But if you do find it, your life changes, and it changes for the better 100% of the time.
No, I love that. And thank you, Tom, for bringing that up, because I think this is important stuff, because what you said was most people go through their life and realizing their true talents. And not because life's not presenting the opportunities for them to identify them. It's because I think the path that you took, the people that you surrounded with, pushing you in a direction. And partly you were open to it. I mean, you can't be a good speaker if you don't have well-articulated thoughts in your head. So I think you probably didn't recognize that too, that because you're speaking to an audience, you have to have a coherent thought. That coherent thought cannot come while things are clear to you. And things probably were so clear to you that when you started writing, they even became more clear. So I really think that as a speaker, as an author, they go hand in hand. That if you're not, or I should not say that, a great writer may not be the best speaker, but a good speaker, chances are, has a good writing capabilities, because they see.
One of the things that I learned, because I've done a lot of speaking engagements, is you have to write out your speech.
Yeah.
First, I never memorize a speech. I use the PowerPoint as sort of just one word or picture memory jogs, and then I can go off for an hour on one topic.
Yeah.
Because I've been devoting my life to my rich habits research. So one topic, and I see a picture, and I'm off. And I think that's important to write out what you want to talk about.
Correct.
And then you sort of break it down into really one word memory jogs, and that's what I've been doing. It's one of the things I've learned about being a really good speaker is you can't too much information kills a speech. So you have to focus on the things that you want to, like, what do I want to share with Saket's audience today?
Correct.
When we talked about this, I said, really, I want them to come away with this one understanding of the 4 paths to wealth, which if they learn anything, the one thing, this is going to be the most important thing that they learn, because it's revolutionary. You'll never see it anywhere else. It's proprietary to my research, and I think they're going to get a lot of value out of that.
Tom, let's jump right into it, buddy. What are those 4 paths to wealth?
Well, these are the 4 paths to self-made wealth. I've written a lot about them, and of course, there's always critics out there, and they say, well, you missed about 4 paths, other paths. There's inheriting your wealth, there's winning the lottery. And I said, no, you didn't really read the article.
Yeah.
It's about self-made. It's about being in control of your life and creating your wealth. If you're going to be one of those individuals who says, hey, I'm going to become wealthy, and I say, how? I'm going to win the lottery, or I'm going to inherit money, or something lucky is going to happen to me, then you're not going to get wealthy, and you have no plan. Well, the nice thing about my research on this particular topic, the 4 paths of wealth, is it gives you everybody has a different personality profile. Some people are outgoing, and some people are, they're shy, and some people are aggressive, and some people are conservative. Everybody's, different. Everybody has a different DNA that we inherit from our parents. And so the nice thing about this 4 paths to wealth is that it really doesn't matter what your personality is. What matters is that you choose the path to wealth that is best suited for your personality. So let me give you an example. The 4 paths are: number 1 is the saver investor path. Number 2 is the big company climber path. Number 3 is the virtuoso path. And number 4 is the dreamer entrepreneur path. Now, let's take the saver investor path and juxtapose it to the entrepreneur path. The saver investor path, most of those individuals have a personality profile where they're frugal, they're savers. Mm-hmm. They want to work a 9 to 5. They don't want to take on enormous responsibilities. They don't want to climb, the company ladder. They just want to have a life. They want to have a life. That's their number 1 priority. But while they're having a life, they want to save 20% of their income and live within their standard of living based on the remaining 80%. That's the saver investor. The entrepreneur is the exact opposite. These individuals don't save. They can't save because they're putting everything on the line. They're they have a high risk tolerance, whereas the saver investor has a low risk tolerance. They're very outgoing, whereas the saver investor is sort of shy, and they're not the kind of person that walks into a room and takes over the room. The entrepreneur is. So there's the whole different set of personality traits associated with those 2 paths. Now, the big company climber path and the entrepreneur path, they're very similar. The big company climbers, they're aggressive. They have a high risk tolerance. Many of them climb the ladder by building these power relationships, and they stay within one company typically. And there's a high risk to that, because let's suppose that, you spent 20 years with the company, and now you've reached the top, and you're, two stages away from being the CEO, and then the company gets bought out, and now you're knocked back down to just like everybody else, right? So there's a lot of risk associated with that. So there's a high risk in the big company climber path as there is in the entrepreneur path. There's less risk in the saver investor path and the virtuoso path. Those paths are those 2 paths are closely aligned. They have the similar personality traits. A virtuoso is someone that likes to be the expert in their industry. They are not the individuals who are thrilled about standing out in a crowd. They want to be behind the scenes, in the back, of being very smart and the best at what they do. And so they have a low risk tolerance. Their profile is I'm just gonna study or practice, because there's the virtuoso is really 2 flavors. There's the knowledge-based virtuoso and the skill-based virtuoso. I would put myself in the category of the knowledge-based virtuoso. I would put some, like if anybody watches football and they saw the Super Bowl, you would see Patrick Mahomes. He'd be in that category of the skill-based virtuoso, the best, among the best in their industry. You could say like a neurosurgeon would be a virtuoso. Somebody like Tom Corley, who specializes in his unique research on rich habit research, that would make me a virtuoso. And, you just have this unique knowledge-based or skill-based. The skill-based part, if you have skills, then that's how you make your money, by deploying your skills. It typically requires a lot of practice. Mm-hmm. That's something somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 hours a day. And it's, there's regular practice, there's repetitive practice, regular practice, and then there's the type of practice where you actually practice subsets of your skills. And then the third type of practice is where you actually seek feedback from others. This is how this is what separates professionals from everybody else, is they actually have coaches, mentors, people that are providing them feedback, who are as good as they are in terms of their skill sets, but they're older and they have wisdom, and they're sharing their wisdom with them as a coach or mentor. And so the skill-based virtuosos have to put in a lot of work. Knowledge-based virtuosos have to put in a lot of work in the form of reading, sort of gaining knowledge and maintaining their knowledge base and gaining knowledge. They are continuous learners, and so I think that it makes it unique if you look at this holistically, okay, great. What kind of a personality trait what are my personality traits? And, I did create a test that you can take. It's actually 4 tests, and it'll give you an idea of what your personality profile is and what path to wealth is you're best suited for. And I think that's important, because if I had it to do all over again, I would have I would have said, I have this innate talent writing. Well, I should have been doing that from day one, shouldn't I? I should have found that innate talent, and that made me a virtuoso of what I do when I was 15, 16, 17 years of age, not at 48. So it's just the nature of what happened to my life, my experience. But I found it. I was lucky enough to find it. So my point in bringing up the 4 paths is there's a lot of people who say I'm going to be rich and I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and they don't have the personality for it, because whenever they face adversity or criticism, they cower and they fade, and they're like a shrinking violet. Those people should not be entrepreneurs, and they shouldn't be big company climbers. They should be saver investors or virtuosos, because those types don't really like criticism that much. They stay away from it. So you have to find what path of wealth is best suited for you. And I think that's my research helps people find that path.
Tom, I love that. Let me repeat the 4 paths. The 4 paths that you really have it's really 4 different types of personality people have. The first one is a saver investor. The second is a company climber. The third one is a virtuoso. And the fourth one is an entrepreneur, right? And I think I love how you described it. That you have to, before you ask yourself, how do I want to make my wealth? It'd be good to understand what is your current capability, because you may be aligning in one of the two. Now, I want to figure out, maybe I'm challenging you in that. Can people move in between? And I'll give you an example.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Saket. So here's some interesting data from my research. The entrepreneurs and the big company climbers at some point migrate over to the saver investor path 100% of the time. There's very few entrepreneurs and big company climbers who say, you know what, I want to put all my money on red again, or I want to devote all my time to doing this. Like the big company climbers are mainly time-based, entrepreneurs are money-based. When they put all their money at risk, they put all their time at risk, the big company climbers. Well, it's interesting, but usually at the age of about 55, when they become wealthy and they've accumulated somewhere in the neighborhood of between $3 and $6 million, the big company climbers and the entrepreneurs almost 100% of the time become saver investors. They're now shifting over to preserving their wealth. They created this wealth by taking risks, by doing these incredible things, climbing the ladder, getting criticized in the process while they're climbing the ladder. And, there's people that are trying to cut your shins as you're climbing the ladder. It's just a nasty political reality of being a big company climber. And the entrepreneur is putting all their money at risk. They're putting all their time and money at risk. Sometimes they get divorced because their spouses said, I've had enough of this. I can't take it anymore. It's too up and down for me. And then when they actually make their money, they make their fortunes, they magically shift and they say, you know what, this was really hard and I'm going to hold on to this money. So yes, it's very rare for a saver investor to migrate to an entrepreneur, or a virtuoso to migrate to an entrepreneur or big company climber. That's unusual. But it's not uncommon for a big company climber, even a virtuoso, or an entrepreneur to migrate over to a saver investor.
I love that. And then, so let's talk about, do you ever see people in a hybrid? And I have not taken the test, so I can't really speak to it. So let's say, am I 100% virtuoso, or am I 80% virtuoso, 20% saver? How clear are all these lines?
Yeah, that's me. It's interesting. When I took my own exam, the entrepreneur path was the path I was supposed to be on. Right behind it was the virtuoso path, and right behind it, the big company climber path. Now, what was interesting is I chose the big company climber path for a good 14, 15 years of my career, and I was successful in climbing the ladder. And there was a reason for that, because I had the personality profile for that. But The one thing I couldn't stand was the politics. I could not stand the politics involved in being a big company climber. I just had a low tolerance for that. Well, I went and I got my CPA, my CFP, I got my master's degree in taxation. I got all these licenses. I devoted most of my life to becoming a virtuoso, and my Rich Habits research was just, has been so far about 14 years of just doing research and becoming an expert in neuroscience and habit formation and things like that, wealth creation and poverty even. And so, I have this, it's not a surprise to me that when I took the exam that I was number one, an entrepreneur, number two, a virtuoso, and number three, a big company climber, right? Neck and neck, like a couple of percentage points apart. Way, way, way back was the saver investor. And the reason for that was, we were raised in poverty, and people who are raised in poverty will understand what I'm saying here. When your inner circle is mostly poor people, the minute that you become wealthier than them, you become the banker of your inner circle. I couldn't save. I remember one time I saved about $6,000, and I said, I'm going to save this money. And this was in my 30s. And then my father said, I need $6,000 to pay my real estate taxes. There it goes, right out the door. All that hard work. So I couldn't. When you're a poor person, it's hard to be a saver investor.
Yeah.
Unless the people in your inner circle who are poor, you exit them from your inner circle. You basically ignore them.
Correct. And
you turn your back on them, which is hard to do, especially when that's family. So so that was something that I struggled with, and I knew, well, I could never be a saver investor because I have too much empathy. And there's too many people in my inner circle that are poor, and I would just give away my money.
Good for you, man. Because if you didn't give it away, you won't earn it all back, right? So which is great. So you had to keep raising your own bar, which is great. So help me in the sense. So now, after listening to this, after maybe taking the test, and we'll talk about where can they take that test a little bit later. What's the next step when somebody figures that out? Because that's great to know what path is the right path for you. What's really the next step?
Well, you need to now sit down and say, am I on the right path? What am I doing? Now, if this was Tom Corley and I took this test and I'm 35 years old and I said, wow, look at this. I'm supposed to be an entrepreneur and a virtuoso, but here I am doing this big company climber stuff. Well, what ended up happening is I eventually, because it was not the right personality, I did not have the exact personality profile to be a big company climber. I couldn't take the politics. I eventually couldn't take it anymore, and I left that the corporate headquarters. I wasted a lot of time, Saket. Had I known that my path was supposed to be an entrepreneur or a virtuoso, those are the ones that were separated by only like 1% or 2%. Had I known that, I wouldn't have wasted 15 years of my life. I would have just focused on being an entrepreneur or being a virtuoso. And I would have had much more success. So imagine now you're 35 years old. This happens usually between the age of 35 and 40 when you have a mortgage and 3 kids. And you say, damn, I put my ladder on my parents' wall.
Yeah.
Your ladder is my innate, I might have this talent for something. I had talent in math. I was good at math. And I said, well, my father said, become an accountant. And that's what, he thought if you became an accountant, you'll never starve. And that meant a lot to me when I was sophomore in college. And so I took my ladder, which is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life as a career, and I put it on my father's wall, become an accountant. That was his dream, not my dream. Happens in between 35 and 40 years old, you realize, I do not like what I'm doing for a living. That's because you put your ladder, your life, what you're going to do for the rest of your life, on somebody else's wall. So now you're listening to this podcast, you said, well, am I in the right wealth path? Is it suitable, the path that I'm on? Most people don't even know that there's 4 wealth paths, so they wouldn't even, now that they've been enlightened a little bit, they'll say, okay, let me find out. And they'll take the test. A lot of people have, and they'll say, gosh, I'm on the wrong path. Well, you know what? You now know. You have self-awareness, and you can change what you're doing with your life. You can't just quit your job. It's unrealistic.
Right.
You're 35, 40 years old. You can't quit your job. You got a wife and kids, and you got a mortgage. So what do? You devote part-time, just like I did when I was writing books. I was running a CPA firm, and I was growing my financial planning practice. The only time I had was 4:30 in the morning to 7 in the morning to write. And that's how I wrote Rich Habits, between 4:30 and 7 in the morning. And it took me, good 16 months to get that manuscript done.
Yeah.
And then I duplicated that process. That's another thing that's interesting about the research that I've done is successful people, wealthy people, they have foolproof processes that they've discovered that they use. We could call them habits. That's fine. I like to call them habits, but they're really just processes. There's things, this is what I'm going to follow. So I took the same process that I use with Rich Habits and I applied it to Rich Kids, the second book, and then to Change Your Habits, Change Your Life, the third book, and so on and so forth. I've had eight books that I've written doing this process. It works. So you and by the way, the money that I'm making on my books now rivals what I'm doing with my CPA and my financial planning. So it takes time doing it partly. It does take time. But if you're raising a family, you have responsibilities. You can't just abandon that and say, "Oh, I'm just going to throw it all on the line. I'm going to take a risk." That's unrealistic.
So Tom, what is a good age to take that test? So I think because when you're 16 and 17, you don't necessarily have your voice because you don't have a life experience, right? So you're just kind of you're going to listen to somebody. It's either your parents, your friends, your counselor, your teacher, whatever.
Right.
At 30 and 40, 30, 35, 40, now you have a lot of responsibilities. And for some people, it may be very daunting. And they may say, especially if you're a saver investor type, you're already risk averse. So at that point, they're like, what's the point in even taking that test? Because it is what it is.
Well, I think it's important to take that test when you're in high school because if you're going to college or if you're going to go into a trade, let's say you take the test because it's really a personality test that steers you to the path to wealth that is suitable for you. And you say, well, look, it says here that I should be a virtuoso. Mm-hmm. I'm 18, I'm 17. So what am I going to major in college? Well, what are the majors that would help me become a virtuoso and whatever it is that I do? Well, you might want to become a scientist. You might want to go say, well, obviously I should be going for my PhD. So college is going to be the stepping stone to my PhD or graduate school. You might want to take a curriculum in college that will help you to become a virtuoso or the top in your field, whatever that might be, that field. If you're an entrepreneur, then go to a university that has entrepreneur programs. There's one university in New Jersey, only one out of all of the universities in New Jersey that has an entrepreneur curriculum. So you have to find that curriculum, that college that has an entrepreneur curriculum if you're going to be an entrepreneur. If you're the saver investor type, meaning I have a low risk tolerance, I want to have a life. I don't want to be working 70 hours a week. I want to work 35 hours per week and I want to hang out with my friends and my family.
Right.
Well, then you could become a teacher or you could become an accountant or anything like that, but know that you have to save 20% or more of your income. It helps steer you in the right direction. At least you're going in, you're not blind, And if you decide to take a path that is not suitable for you, you go in with eyes wide open. And you say, okay, well, according to Tom Corley, I'm not going to succeed in this path. And then you say, I don't care what Tom Corley says, I'm going to do it anyway. And then,
True.
6-7 years later, if you say, okay, well, that didn't work, and then I'm going to listen to Tom Corley now. That means everybody's stubborn, right? We have egos. We think this what is he?
Yeah. So Tom, the definition of wealth in your self-made wealth path.
Great question.
What is that? Is that money? What is that? Because I'm thinking about when you said as a teacher, so wealth path as a teacher is very different than an entrepreneur, than a big company. We're not saying that all of them, I'm not using your words, I'm putting words in your mouth at this time, so correct me. You're not saying you're all going to become a net worth of $10 million. That's not the outcome.
No, so in order to make it into my study as a wealthy person, you had to have a net investable assets of 3.2 million or more. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the saver investors in my study were all in their late 50s and early 60s. The entrepreneurs in my study were typically in their mid 40s, early 50s. The big company climbers were typically in their early 50s, and the virtuosos were, anywhere between 45 and 50, 60 years of age. But the interesting thing is the saver investors had the lowest net investable assets, let's just call it wealth, of 3.4 million.
I'm sorry, Tom, just to interrupt. When you say net investable asset, what does that mean?
That means it doesn't include the equity in your home for most people.
But if you have rental properties and stuff, it all includes it, except your home. And
rental properties includes your 401k. It just your savings. It just doesn't include the equity in you.
Yeah.
Now, if you were a big company climber, they had a wealth of about 4 million, and if you were virtuoso, they had a wealth of about 4.1 million. I think actually it was inverted. The big company climbers had 4.1, and the virtuosos had 3.9. The reason being is the big company climbers, 90% of their wealth came from the stock compensation related to their being a partner in a big law firm or a big CPA firm, right?
Yeah.
And the entrepreneur path, and by the way, so the saver investor took 32 years to accumulate that 3.4 million. The big company climber took about 20 years, the virtuoso, and the entrepreneur took 12 years to accumulate 7.4 million. It was by far the shortest and the wealthiest path. Now, of course, everybody now is going to say, well, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. It is also the hardest path to wealth, the most stressful path to wealth, and the path to wealth that had the highest divorce rate.
So remember that, right? Before you jump into any of that, you have to.
Good.
I think what I love about this model is most people, and I have a lot of friends who are calling me nowadays saying, hey, my kid wants to go to college. And they're not looking for my advice. They're just kind of sharing. And I was thinking about the other day, I wish I had a framework to say that, hey, you know what? There's functional paths, which is go to become a doctor or an engineer or this or that. That's a very technical skill. But I liked your classification as well, because now you're saying is that doesn't matter which technical path you go, there are 4 possible ways you can end up. Just because you're becoming a doctor does not mean you're going to be a saver investor. You could also be an entrepreneur. A lot of medical doctors are right now becoming professional investor. There's a whole term called docpreneur coming up, which is the doctors who are entrepreneurs, right? Yeah. They're doctors who are heavily researched. So just because you're picking a technical path does not bind you to any one of these categories. This is no matter what you study for, what kind of path are you going to explore after you're done? Or you may never be done, especially if you're a virtuoso, because the whole life is going to be a learning path. So I like that, and I like your categorization here. I had one question. Why did you pick the number? I think you said $3.64 million. What was the reason for that?
3.2 million was in my financial planning world. If you multiplied that by 5% in almost any state, you could survive on that income.
Got it.
Meaning your standard of living would be $160,000 a year.
Okay.
And in New Jersey, you could live off of that. In New York, California, you probably need about 220. But for most of the states, other than these these high cost of living states, and New Jersey's one of them, but they're still that's where that $3.2 million number comes from. What standard of living? What would you need your standard of living to be? That's the answer that I was trying to come up with. And how do I get the wealth number? I know 5% is, you just draw 5% of your wealth every year. Well, in New Jersey, and New York metropolitan area was 160,000 in the financial planning world. That's on average what you needed to live a kind of a good life. So divide 160,000 by 5%, you get $3.2 million.
Got it. Okay, perfect, Tom. That makes sense. So Tom, we're coming towards the end of our show here. I'm loving this conversation because this is a framework I've never thought about it. But it's kind of like, I'm aware of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad's framework, which is very different. They have a lot of similarities, but very different than your path.
Yeah, I want to jump, since you brought that up, I want to jump on it. I don't know if you notice, but Dave Ramsey and Robert Kiyosaki, they go at each other in the media. Oh, you know, right? And Robert Kiyosaki calls him an idiot, and Dave Ramsey calls him an idiot.
Yes.
And the funny thing is, because I've been on both of their radio programs, people don't know that Robert Kiyosaki had a radio program. I don't know if he still does.
He still has it, richdad.com.
Yeah.
Still has it.
I was doing that, and then I was on Dave Ramsey's show, and I put the Dave Ramsey interview on my website if you want to listen to it. But what's funny is they're both right. They're calling each other idiots, but they're both right. It's just that Dave Ramsey focuses on the saver investors.
Saver investor, definitely.
And Robert Kiyosaki focuses on the entrepreneur.
No, you're completely right. I always tell people, I think...
Isn't that interesting, Saket, that they don't understand themselves, and they're wealth experts. They don't understand themselves that there's 4 paths to wealth. That's why my research is so profound in my mind.
So I love that framework, man, because I think it's kind of like also in my world when I'm helping people develop their wealth strategy, where we're trying to figure, we're not, I think now I'm going to borrow it or steal it, I guess. But I give you the credit for where it belongs, that, you know what kind of person are you? Because not everyone's going to be a passive investor in a specific asset class just because I'm telling them to be.
Right.
And I could see that conversation going a lot better. Hey, I'm a saver investor. If you're a saver investor, your path to wealth, even from passive investment, is very different. You're not going to invest, chances are, in a venture capital fund that Saket Jain has, because the risk appetite is not there. But you may be a great person for a multifamily syndication, or you stay in stocks and bonds, or this or that. Like, there's different ways you could use that to also determine your investor DNA, right? Where what is your investor DNA? If you have one of these categorizations. So no, I see a lot of different implications for this model. So thank you for sharing that with us, Tom. So Tom, next question because we're heading towards the end, I want to be respectful of your time here and the audience time as well. As you reflect back, Tom, do you have kids? Remind me.
Yeah, I have 3 kids, and they're all adults.
They're all adults. Perfect.
So all my rich habits, guinea pigs, and they're all they're doing much better than I was doing in my life at their stage.
I love that. So what's one value that, as you reflect back on your you raising them, what's one value you emphasized a lot of?
Gosh, I paid them to read books. I paid them $25 each to read How to Win Friends and Influence People when they were in high school. Each kid, once they got into high school, I paid them $25 each to read that book. I would go back and I would tell myself, read this book. And by the way, imagine, it's a slippery slope socket when you think about it. Oh, what would I go back and if I could go back in time? Do you realize if you go back in time and you say anything to yourself, you probably won't have the 3 kids that you have. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. So that's
fun travel, isn't it? Good thing.
It's so funny, Tom. I used to ask that question. I've rephrased that question. I'm like, I don't think I want Tom to do anything different. No. But you learned a lesson for your kids for sure. So you've raised the kids a certain way. That's why I changed the question framing now.
I think the better question is, knowing what you know, what do you want to teach your kids that you wish that you knew at their age? And I said to my kids, I said, this is what I would come home with these rich habits. I said, this is what I learned today. And I would tell them, you got to read 30 minutes to learn. And by the way, it's so important building relationships with the right people. And when you start dating, the person that you want to be dating, is somebody that shares your values, your habits, that's you're in alignment with, especially when they get into college and after college. That's important. So you just don't want them dating any person because they're, the divorce rate is high because the people who get married don't share values and habits and a clear vision of the life that they both desire. They have different visions, and so that gets them in trouble.
So Tom, how do you? So let's go back to your idea. I really love that paying your kids to read books, especially ones that they don't either value at that time because they don't see the impact of it. How do you? My kids are 8 and 10 years old. It's a personal question at this point. If I'm giving them money, how do I know they drew the value out of that book? Right.
Well, what I talk about, and this is very important because this is a whole nother topic. If you want to teach your kids how to be savvy financially, the time to start teaching them, I believe, is when they're like the 8th grade to freshman year in high school. And I think when you're 10 years old, you're you're in the 4th grade. That's a little early.
Yeah.
They're not going to learn the lessons. I think it's 8th grade freshman year. And what you do is, so these kids are getting money from gifts. And maybe they're getting money in the 8th grade and freshman year when they start working. And you say, guess what's going to happen? With the gifts, you can take 20% of the gifts, 80% is going into the bank account. When you're earning money, 50% is going into the bank account and is going to be invested. And the other 50% you can do with what you want. So you get them into the habit of saving money right early on. And the parent becomes their accountability partner. It becomes their mentor. The parent is actually participating in their learning to become financially literate. So they're involved in educating them on how to be good with money. That's very, very important. In my household, my parents took our money. So that's not a good lesson to teach your kids, right?
Yeah.
Anytime you save, somebody's going to take your money. So don't save money. That's what poor people, that's the lesson that they learn. You want to be that proactive accountability partner, teaching your kids how to be savers. And then if they decide later in life that they're going to be an entrepreneur, they'll probably have a good amount of chunk of change saved up. And that safety net could help them as an entrepreneur, to pay their mortgage and things like that.
Love that. Tom, next question really is, where do you feel as you reflect in your research, in talking to other people, where does humanity pull the gap right now? Where should humanity be towards?
Well, this is a powerful question, and I've written about this. The system is rigged against us. It's rigged against the poor, and it's rigged against the middle class. There's a couple of tools that they use to create this wealth gap, and it's intentional. They're creating the wealth gap. They want a handful of people having all the money in the world, and they use interest rates, they use inflation, they use suppressed real wage growth, they use taxation, and they use consumerism. These 5 tools are used by the puppet masters, if you will, who are in control of a lot of the pulling the strings in the world. They know that if the economy is booming, isn't it funny, Saket, when the economy is booming and people are making advances, they're starting to get ahead. What happens? All of a sudden, they put the brakes on everything by calling, saying that the economy is overheating. We need to, increase the interest rates because we need to stop the flow of capital because the economy is overheating. Economy is not overheating. That's a nonsense. That they're worried about is that real wage growth is lifting people up, and they don't. I hate to say this. The system is rigged against the poor and the middle class. They don't want these people to get a leg up because they want them to really, most of society, they want them to be struggling.
Yeah.
Because then they're not watching the leaders. They're too busy worrying about paying their bills. But if you have some money and some savings and your wages are going up because real wage growth is increasing because the economy is thriving, that poses a risk to the leadership because now people are going to have more money and they're going to be starting to pay attention to things. They're going to have money gives you bandwidth. Why? Because now you can pay all these bills. You don't have to worry about them. So now you have more neurological bandwidth, and you can start focusing on what your leaders are doing, what your politicians are doing. You don't want that. So I think the wealth gap exists. It's created. It's artificially created. It's intentional. And it's intended to keep us in a state of constant chaos so that we are not focusing on what the puppet masters are doing in society.
Oh my God, Tom, you hit, I think we got to do another episode point on this topic because it's such an important topic, right? Because I think most people if you start looking at the motivations for the wars, for the messaging, for the political message especially, if you start looking at the details of that and why a certain message was pushed out at a certain point in time. If you start looking at the motivations, it's really to create a divisive society, period.
Yeah.
And divisive society takes the attention away from everything else. Yeah. And I think it's you and I relate to that is in your example, growing up poor, these were not important thoughts for you because you were trying to figure out how to put food on the table, how to pay a mortgage, what a politician is doing or what a bank is doing or what a Fed is doing. Yeah, it's important to you. Well, you don't have the mental capacity to think about that because every time you're thinking about these things, you're not thinking about how to bring food to the table.
Yeah.
So that's a very important gap, and I think it's a gap that I talk about that a lot on our show. We have written articles on that, and I love to bring more light on your topic and try to direct some of the audience to your written material because this is important. This is very, very important. I just bought a series of book by Uncle Eric. For my kids, really, to try to get them to understand what free market capitalism is. What really is liberty? What was this country created on? But it's important for us to at least have an understanding of that. So, sorry, I'm going to go off on tangent. I'm going to stop. But thank you for bringing that up. It's a very important topic. Tom, the last few questions, man. One is, in the last 40, 50 minutes, we've talked a lot about the 4 paths to wealth. Is there anything that you believe that I didn't ask you or you didn't share that our audience will benefit from?
I think one thing, there's an easy way and there's a hard way to become wealthy.
Uh-huh.
The hard way is the school of hard knocks. That's by learning through mistakes. You don't know what you don't know, and so you trial and error. And then there's the smart, easy way. That's finding a mentor. So I'd like to say, look, everything that I've said still stands, but why don't you find somebody that is successful and then ask them to guide you? If let's say you're in this particular career path and that person's in that industry, ask them to be a mentor and I'll tell you this, they need to be wealthy, independently wealthy people, because people who are still trying to accumulate their wealth are going to not have enough time to be mentors to you. They'll mentor you, but it's going to be sporadic.
Yeah.
Somebody who is independently wealthy, and I do this with a couple of people that are young in college. I have a set time on a set day where we talk, sometimes for a year or more, but I always schedule it as a year. And I'll say, we're going to talk every month, this time and this day. And I do. I put it on my Outlook and we talk. Successful people want to help other people because it lifts society. And plus, it makes you feel good about yourself when you're doing good. It just does. It makes you feel better about yourself. And I always like to mentor young people. I just do. It's one of the things that I'm passionate about. I think that's what I want to leave you with, is find a mentor, somebody who's willing to mentor you so that you can learn without having to make all of those costly, in terms of time and money, mistakes.
Yeah, I think I wholeheartedly agree with that, because what a mentor does is he or she would shrink the time, right? What takes you 10 years with a right mentor now, it's important to find the right mentor, because there are people who don't know how to be mentors, and I've myself. But if you find the right person, what takes you 10 years could happen in 10, and that's what you want. That's what you want. Now, they're not going to do the work for you. So if you're looking at an easy button, mentorship is not for you. But if you're looking at somebody who's going to push you in the directions that's good, that you're going to expand and accelerate your growth in, a mentor is
and it's got to be somebody you can relate to. Somebody that is, if somebody who's an opposite personality of you, it's just not going to work. You got to find a mentor that you can relate to.
Completely. So Tom, on that note, buddy, where can people find you, learn more about your work, download resources that you have? I know you're a prolific writer and a reader yourself. So what resources do you have for others?
So just go to my website, richhabits.net. You'll find everything on there. I write articles every day. I have free ebooks on there. You can go to Amazon, get my books, Rich Habits series of books. So richhabits.net is probably a good starting point.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you again for your time. I know you're a busy man, but thank you for spending so much time in first of all, researching these topics, and then coming up with insightful observations that can alter any life's trajectory. So thank you for that. And thank you, listeners, for hopefully you got a lot of value, and hopefully you got understanding of a framework that not only you, but people around you, you're able to share that so they can better their own lives. So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you again for listening. Tom, thank you again for being a guest.
My pleasure.
If you got value from this episode, you might consider sharing this content with a friend. But most importantly, be sure to take action on what you've learned. One way you can take the next step is to connect directly with Socket on an investor call. That link is waiting for you in the show notes below.